love when we have a special guest in, and we do here now. This guy is the CEO of Saybrook Management, one of the preeminent, if not the preeminent, organizations associated with logistics, shipping, how stuff gets from here to there. And I have every manner of question for the great Jonathan Rosenthal. Hello, sir. Nice to see you.
Well, let's hope we don't let down your listeners.
Well, your insecurity is charming, but believe me, it's misplaced. This is right up your alley. I actually thought of talking to you and began to initiate the effort to speak with you when the bridge was downed by that ship that hit that bridge and the bridge collapsed, and it not only we lost those souls working on the bridge, but it affected a major bit of commerce that goes through that harbor. And it made me wonder about something that you've mentioned before, which is the vulnerability of our ports and sort of the inefficiency of our ports and just the world of ports and shipping and trucking and getting stuff from here to there, and how we measure up. For a moment, for the news cycle, everyone was focused on that. Now it seems we've kind of moved on, but I wonder if you could just give me a state of the state, how that did affect shipping, and then just give me a broader sense of where this country sits worldwide when it comes to getting stuff from here to there.
Well, those are a whole bunch of questions wrapped into one. You never let me down. You always come up with good, thoughtful questions, Mark. So yeah, we started talking when the ship ran into the bridge, and you called and said, "Hey, what do you know about that?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know about why the ship ran into the bridge. I can make some guesses, but I know a lot about disruption." And that's really what that was, right? It was physical disruption, but it was disruption of a part of the supply chain, which is a network. It was a very small node, that is a bridge. That's a one node in a billion node network. And that's what I want you to think about. And I want your listeners to think about. The supply chain, it isn't a supply chain. People call it a supply chain. That sort of emotes a linear path, right? A to B to C. That's not how it works. It's a very complex network. And that network includes lots and lots of nodes. It's a lot like the human body, if you think about that. It's like a nervous system. And the nervous system is all connected. So a trucking company in Columbus, Ohio would be a node on the network, and a warehouse in Dubai would be a node on the network. And how do those interact? Okay, so think about it more like a neural network. In fact, in science, we call it, in logistics science, we call it a neural network, oddly enough. And so what happens when there's a disruption at one or more places on that network? And the truth is, bad things happen, and they happen quickly. And there's a network effect. It doesn't just affect the bridge. It affects the ships coming in. It affects the rail going out. It affects all kinds of things, right? So that we think of that as a neural network.
But again, now, John, just to interrupt for a second, I think the notion that it affects things was clear to everybody looking in. But why isn't this network that you talk about able to compensate for this disruption?
It's a great question. The fact is that the neural network, the global neural network, is extremely fragile, And we've been talking about this and lecturing. I've been lecturing on this for years, that we are very fragile in many, many respects, particularly here in the U.S. You ask the question, how do we do in the U.S.? Now, most people would say, well, we're the U.S. We must do really, really well. The fact is, we suck. We generally suck. And there's a bunch of reasons for it. It's not that we're lazy or that we're stupid or any of that stuff. It's a little bit of our system. Let me back up a second.
But let me back up to just that. What does that mean? We suck. We suck at what?
Well,
Getting stuff from here to there, at protect. Yeah, go ahead. Please expand on that.
I'll give you some metrics. So the port of Los Angeles, which is it is the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. It accounts for 42% of all imports into the U.S. So very big port. Um, Ports get rated by the World Bank every year. In 2021, they rated 380 global ports all over the world, Zimbabwe, Rotterdam, everybody. Guess who came in on the productivity and efficiency scale? 379 and 380. Long
Out,
Beach and Los Angeles.
out of how many?
380.
Out of 380, we're 379 and 380, is what you said?
Correct. Correct.
For the bottom two.
We are the bottom two. We are the in Los Angeles and Long Beach. We are the least productive. The World Bank, not me, the World Bank rated us. In fact, I sent you that, Mark. I sent you the article.
Right? I saw it. I just wanted to react
so
as though I hadn't read
sent that to you because when I tell people this, most people think I'm lying.
Yeah. So I was just trying to underscore it for the audience because I was essentially recreating my reaction when I first saw it.
Right, yes. Right. No, listen, that was my reaction. So part of so I really want to focus on disruption today. I really want to focus on what's really happening in the world. And why is this?
But Jonathan, please, before you do that, or at the same time that you do that, or along the way, or just make sure that you will at some point address include why we're 379 and 380. Why this lack of productivity at the ports? I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. The Port of Los Angeles, I would certainly think, it uses sophisticated technology, I would think. It uses manpower that works efficiently, whatever. You just presume these things. That again, that's the myth of American exceptionalism, maybe. But I'm just wondering why we're at the bottom.
Well, I think part of it is the way things work in the U.S. I mean, we're a democracy. And so, we kind of got to vote on everything, right? And so, stuff doesn't happen quite the way it might in China, for example.
Meaning it doesn't happen as quickly? Is that your point?
Yeah, it doesn't happen as quickly. When China wants to build a port, you don't think they have a referendum, do you? Like they just say, we're going to build a port. Then, well, wait a second, I live here. No. You used to live here. Move. So things are just done differently. I've got a guy that works for us, a great guy who's a 3-star admiral. He runs our aviation division, and he says, the U.S. has a very different culture and a very different way of doing things. And with respect to the information gap, he says, look, you want to blow something up? Call the U.S. Navy. Like, we're the best. We got 11 carrier groups. You want to blow stuff up? We're the best. You want a disinformation? You want to manipulate a population? You want to use information to change the narrative? Call China. Call Russia. We're not very good at that. We're a transparent society. And so this whole notion of disruption and where I'm leading here, I don't mean to be rambling on here, but where I'm leading is that disruption is as mind-numbing as a nuclear bomb. They have something called kinetic warfare. Kinetic warfare is you shoot a missile and you blow something up. That's kinetic warfare. They also have something called subkinetic warfare. What does a bomb do after all? A bomb just disrupts, right? That's what it does. It's intended to disrupt. Subkinetic warfare is a manipulation of information. It is everything that is done before a bomb goes off. So when we start thinking about China, we start thinking about Taiwan and how are they going to respond when we try to block them from taking over Taiwan. They're not going to send a missile and bomb Columbus, Ohio. That's not what they're going to do. We know that they've embedded malware. Mark, that they just reported 2 weeks ago that our cranes at the ports are embedded with malware, that the Chinese manufacture most of it. So what they will do, back to disruption, what they will do is disrupt. And so our information systems become critically important. The data that is produced by these neural networks, the neural network is producing data like, where's my stuff? Where are my trucks? How did they, where's my pallet? Where's my inventory? How are things moving? When is it going to be disrupted? Can we use predictive analytics? Can we use artificial intelligence to predict disruption and mitigate disruption? We've seen back in the pandemic. Look at what happened when there was disruption. The pandemic disrupted. We had a spike in inflation. We had huge jobs loss. I think people for the first time realized, oh my God, like the supply chain can really impact in a meaningful way our way of life. I think that was the first time we actually came to that. Prior to that, as you well know, because we've known each other a long time, as a supply chain expert, as a logistician, I was the last guy anybody wanted to talk to at a cocktail party. Like, what do you do? Well, I'm a logistician. Next, like getting girls was tough. They always wanted to talk to you, Mark. But
to be fair, no one wanted to talk to you at a party before you were a logistician. So
that is true. That is true.
I know.
Yeah.
But to the point, you're right about the fact that I think the pandemic made us acutely aware of the supply chain, when I think you could have stopped 10 people on the street and 9 of us probably really wouldn't have been able to tell you what the supply chain really was prior to COVID.
So that permeated American the corporate world. So there is no major corporation in the U.S. today where there isn't someone on the board of directors raising their hand and saying to the CEO, "Hey, what's going on with our supply chain? Are we resilient? Can we be disrupted? Are we subject to attack, cyber attack, a ransomware?" You would be negligent if you were a board member not asking that question. So everyone today is now asking, well, okay, how can we become more resilient? How can we be protected? How can we predict in advance disruption within our supply chain? How can we mitigate it or avoid it? And so that's really where I'm spending 100% of my time is on that information technology. Now it blows my mind and may blow yours to some extent. I'll give you an example. You know what a container is, a big metal box, right? That metal box has no connectivity. That metal box is just a metal box. It's not connected to the internet. It has no brain. It doesn't know who it is. It doesn't know where it's going. It doesn't know the temperature or the weight or anything else. All of that is changing. Pallets, chassis, trucks, containers, drones, you name it, anything that moves is going to provide information. That information becomes incredibly valuable, particularly in an artificial intelligence world, where that information, you can actually make sense of it, right? Right. So, because so there is no, in my view, there is no richer environment for data than logistics, because everything that's moving, its information is changing every minute. Right?
Prior to this evolution, was there a way to track any of these big metal boxes, as you call them? Was there an air tag type thing in them, or was there?
Not really. They have very primitive 40-year-old technology. They have an RFID tag sometimes. Sometimes they'll have scans on the side where there's an optical reader. But remember, that's very subject to fault, and it's also latent. That means you scan it, so the minute it gets scanned, you might know where it is. You don't really know much about it, but you might know where it is. But then 5 minutes later, it moves, and it doesn't get scanned for another 3 days, so you don't know.
So there's no real-time intelligence, meaning intelligence, I think, is a fine word.
Exactly.
There's no real-time keeping track of this stuff.
Yeah. So we just acquired a company in Rotterdam called Container 42, which is probably the leading platform. It's a company that it's a consortium with Intel and IBM and Cisco, and because it is the thought leader in smart containers. So there will be smart containers, smart chassis, smart trucks. That's all happening.
That has to be. I mean, that's going to happen quickly, I would think.
It is happening pretty rapidly, and it helps on all kinds of fronts, like counterfeit goods, like contraband. You know, people always say, they ask me, there's so many containers coming into the U.S. Do they check all those containers? Like, do they look inside? No, that's not how they do it. What they do is they look at who packed them, and they say, well, this was packed by, some great Japanese, Toyota Motor Company. And great. So Toyota, they're not going to have contraband. So we don't need to check that one. Okay, well, so you don't need to check that unless between the movement of that container and getting to the US, somebody got in it and stuffed some junk that you weren't supposed to put in the container, right? So,
sure, absolutely.
Okay. So wouldn't you like to have a device on the container that says, hey, I've been tampered with?
Right.
Okay. Well,
this
you
is
don't
extraordinary
have that,
to me that those things don't exist, because
No.
I have to think this technology isn't even that expensive.
It's not that expensive. The technology is not that expensive. And now with our friends at Starlink putting up a mesh net, that was another technological impediment, that you have satellites, but those satellites have dead spots. You're moving from network to network. You might be going from 5G to 3G to satellite, and so you have these dead spots, and these assets need to. Now all of a sudden you've got a mesh net, which is actually a net around the Earth that's continuous. So that provides a big opportunity for logisticians to really understand how things move.
Wow. So it sounds as though this is an industry that has been a bit behind the technological curve.
Way behind. Listen, the
It's
industry
weird because
is,
it's such a critical industry, as we've just sort of stipulated. I mean, it's so insanely important.
And there's reasons. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why it's so far behind, but we're 100 years behind, or 50 years behind. I mean, it just hasn't. It's beginning to develop, but look, the container was invented in 1956. Okay, that was the first time we had a container. The first container ship wasn't built until 1963. Now that was a really good idea, the container. We reduced our transportation costs by 80% by using a container. Now, what did that do? Well, it allowed us to go to places like Vietnam and China, and because our transportation costs are much lower, we could use that less expensive labor. But our supply chains got very long in order to reach that cheap labor. That was all done because of containerization. There wasn't any other reason to do that. It was the reduction in the transportation. In transportation costs. I got to tell you, credit where credit's due. America's a great place. There was a guy who was an entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean who said, I'm going to invent the container. And he did it.
It's extraordinary because it's so simple in a way. As you say, it's a big metal box,
It's a big metal box, and you put, and you put your stuff in it, and you lock it. And we have ways today of managing exactly how that container moves, like things like geozones. We can actually set up. We know where the container is going, and if the container leaves that geozone by 10 feet, we know it's going from the factory to the port. And the minute it strays away from that, what we call a geozone or geofence, the minute it strays, it notifies us, hey, your container just is outside your geozone. Something's going on. Better look at it, right? So there's so much going on, and it's very, very exciting. People are intimidated by artificial intelligence, and they shouldn't be. I mean, we should certainly be sensitive to it. But in things like logistics, it's going to be amazing.
The uh, the vulnerability of our ports. Could you speak to that a little bit? You sort of hinted. You made me think of it when you talk about China. You talk about Chinese technology, and China's an adversary of the U.S., and they certainly would want ways to maybe monitor things going on in the U.S., just as the U.S. would want things monitored in China and Russia, among our adversaries that way. But can you speak to this technology and the technologies at the ports and the vulnerability to an adversary like China?
Well, what we learned recently, and was reported by the New York Times, is that the cranes that lift the boxes have communication devices. Many of these are produced in China, and they were ostensibly produced in China because the steel was much cheaper in China, so they could manufacture these in China, and so everybody bought Chinese cranes. They are by far the dominant crane in U.S. ports. Those cranes have connectivity to the internet, and the information is stored. We think it's stored in China. Now, I'll tell you where I know I have better information because I'm kind of in the middle of it. Are drones. So, and it's related to the cranes, but the drone, you know what a drone is. A drone flies around. A drone is nothing more than a truck that flies. That's what it is. Happens to be maybe a very small truck, but it carries a load. It carries a payload. That payload is some kind of a sensor. We usually think about it as a camera. You buy the drone, you fly it over your kid's bar mitzvah, you take a bunch of pictures. Well, right? But
Right.
after all, that's an optical sensor, right? It just absorbs digitally, it absorbs optics. Well, we have drones that'll absorb infrared. They can absorb LiDAR, but they absorb data. That's what they do. So it might surprise you to learn that there are 900,000 Chinese drones deployed in U.S. airspace. 900,000 today.
And when you say Chinese drones, you mean made in China.
Made in China. Made in China, correct. So the dominant player is a company called DJI. You guys may well use DJI drones. Go buy one at Best Buy. In the industrial market, which is the market where people fly drones to get information, they're not flying the bar mitzvah. That market is also dominated by DJI. That data is absorbed by the drone, and then it is stored on a server in the cloud. So that information, that data, which is very granular, and it's geospatial. So it's not just a photograph. It is a very granular representation of whatever it is. Might be a power plant, could be a highway, could be a power line, a gas pipeline. It's very granular data, and you know right where that is, right? So you could map that power line within inches. And that information is stored in China on DJI servers.
Now, the last part of that is perhaps the most provocative and disturbing. We only have a few minutes left, but when you talk about something that was built in China, a technology that was built in China and that a lot of consumers in this country and others are using, businesses as well as just regular consumers, that's kind of become something we're used to. We're used to everything being made in China, we buy it. But when you talk about the data being stored on servers there, then it makes me wonder, how does that get past government watchdogs or whatever regulatory arms of the government are associated with this? And also, does that necessarily mean that that data is being aggregated in some way that it could be weaponized against the U.S.? I guess the answer to the last question would be, well, of course, if it's in the Chinese servers, then that belongs to China.
Yeah. So we know for sure. Look, I didn't make this up. I mean, there is a congressional subcommittee on China. There's a Senate committee on China. Mark Warner is the chairman. They're actually doing a pretty good job of trying to understand this. The truth is, when it's all said and done, and I've talked to the experts and we've testified and given advice to the congressional committee, the truth is we were asleep at the switch. But for sure,
should there have been a regulatory body that this got passed, or in other words, does this fall under the realm of some regulatory body? Yes, it does.
Absolutely.
And it got into the outfield on them.
We just didn't understand it.
Okay.
We didn't understand the power of information. We didn't understand what they were doing. Now, what is clear is that that data is being stored on servers in China, and there is legislation. I think you can Google it. It's if you put in anti-drone legislation, there was an act last year. There's an act coming up this year. There was a very good report by the committee that was written on Chinese influence generally. So that's occurring. That data does exist on Chinese drones. When the Chinese, when DJI and the Chinese government are approached about it, they swear that they don't look at any of that data. And I don't know about you, but I believe them. But the interesting thing is that when you put together this fabric, right? It's not just one thing. It's important to understand the power of information. And when you put together things like the drone data and the crane data, and the fact that we know that China wants Taiwan, at some point, the experts say at some point they're going to do something with Taiwan. They're not going to fight us. They're not going to fight our aircraft carriers. They're going to shut down the power grid in the Western U.S. That's the kind of thing they will do, in my view. So again, getting back to sort of the broader question, put China aside. It's a very interesting area, something we should be paying attention to. But our focus is really understanding in a very deep way the information that is generated off of assets that move. When you understand how assets move and what kind of data is produced by those assets and what you can extrapolate based, about the economy, about the climate, about disruption, about congestion. Why is the Southern California so congested? Why are the freeways packed with? Well, it's because we don't understand the data, and we can use that data to make our world a better place. I'm very optimistic. I hope this doesn't come across as being pessimistic.
Just the opposite. I think it comes across with that optimism. In fact, I would kind of wrap up by asking you, so a lot of these issues related to congestion in the skies, congestion on freeways in California and beyond, you think that many of these things could be addressed and life could be improved, and of course in the world of logistics, with AI and with more data to then feed into the AI?
Yes, absolutely. We're sort of a weird culture in that, and maybe it's just human beings. We focus for some reason on devices, right? So how are we going to clean up the air? We're going to make our cars better, make them electric, make them non-polluting. Great, that's all great. So we've done a good job in the trucking world of focusing on propulsion. We've completely ignored information and the power of data. So we shouldn't ignore propulsion. We've made great strides on propulsion, but the changes become incremental, right? They get harder as the changes get better and better. What we should also be doing is saying, why in the world are our terminals closed all night? That's when we should have the trucks on the road when there's no traffic. Why in the world are we moving all of our goods 60 miles to the Inland Empire? Why shouldn't we be doing things with them closer in where we don't have to drive 60 miles? I mean, keep in mind, these are big numbers because we have 50,000 gate moves in Los Angeles every day. There are 50,000 containers moving. So that adds up.
And the reason that they might concentrate on areas like the Inland Empire or 60 miles east of Los Angeles is because of money, right? I assume that that's what it has
Well,
to
it's
do.
well, it's partly money. It's partly the union influence, right? The closer you get to the port, you've got some union issues. I mean, that's another big. You asked me a question: why are the ports so inefficient? Particularly in California. I think that I think a lot of this lies at the doorstep of our politicians. The unions in California, this is not rocket science. The unions in California have an enormous influence over elected officials. And
And they want to maintain a status quo, you're saying.
they want to maintain.
They want to employ their
They want,
people.
they want to employ their people at pretty high wages, and that's okay. I mean
Right, that's their job. Right,
that's
as a
their
union.
job.
Right. Yeah.
But they do have. I would say that the unions in California have a disproportionate influence, and it's fine to make money, and everybody needs to make a good living and all of that stuff, but not at the expense of inefficiency. Inefficiency is bad. I have studied inefficiency for 40 years, and I cannot find anything that is good about inefficiency. And on the flip side, efficiency is almost always good.
Sure. No, I mean it's even if they're reluctant participants at some point, the union is going to have to give up some ground, and I think they are, but they may have to do it more expeditiously.
And there are ways to do that. I mean, we try to get them to learn about the technology because they certainly have a great workforce, very, very dedicated workforce. I've had, I had a wonderful conversation at dinner with Jimmy Hoffa, the son, not the father, about this issue. And these are very smart people. I mean, we know the Teamsters well, for example. They're
sure. I mean, that's your world. I would think you'd have to.
Yeah, and they're good guys, and and women.
They want to see that. I would think they want to see that port rating go up also. I mean, 379 and 380 is, not something you want to put on the resume. Hey, Jonathan Rosenthal, I love our time together. It's already up. Please come back and visit again. Much to talk about. I'd like to talk world economics with you. I mean, your background, really spans so much of this stuff and these are issues that are contemporary issues facing all of us. So really appreciate you being here, my friend.
Well, it's a great and bold world. And I encourage the young folks out there not to be afraid of it. Be excited because it's fantastic. I mean, what's happening is really exciting.
Really, really cool. Jonathan Rosenthal, everybody. Thanks, John. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.